Okay, here we go. Part two of the CRF450X motor build. This will be the top end section. And so we're going to start with our base gasket here. Once again, all OEM parts were used on this motor rebuild. Our dowels in, our Walker dowel, and our two stud dowels. This customer elected to use a TRX piston out of the quad. It has two compression rings as opposed to one on the OEM 450X piston. I personally never ran this. I always just stuck with the OEM 450X piston. Never had any durability issues or anything like that. I believe this TRX piston is slightly heavier. You can see I'm just checking to make sure where the compression rings go, but if you do use one of these, the bottom ring has an N marked on the top, and that'll face up. And that's the one I'm installing there. And then your top ring will have an R on it. And that one goes on top there. His cylinder was bad, so you can see that ring there in the NICA seal, so it was bad. So we actually got a new cylinder here. More on that in a minute. But I always prefer to install the piston in the cylinder first. So you can see I'm putting one square clip in. I believe that was the left side or clip, or the side closest to the cam chain. Assembly lube in the cylinder. Make sure you orient it right and put it in upside down. Still having making sure that your intake and exhaust orientation on it is correct. Pretty easy to identify with the bigger cutouts on the top of the piston going towards the intake, smaller cutouts on top of the piston going towards the exhaust. And this is a little bit of a balance here where you're getting it in, but you still got room to put the pin in. So got the cylinder on, and now I'm aligning the pin with the small end of the rod on the crank. Once I got that pushed in, take a rag and a safety measure to put in the second circlip I'm doing there. And then once that's in, check our rings, we push our cylinder down, give it a little tap, and it is on. But if anybody has a keen eye, you've noticed we have a problem. So I put the other cam chain guide in, cylinder head gasket on, dowels on, and as I go to put the cam chain in, tensioner in here, caught my eye that it was sideways, and I couldn't get the bolt in with the electric start motor in. So as I figure out, Honda gave us the wrong cylinder. So it was the correct cylinder, correct part number, but it doesn't have the vent there like this old one. See the crankcase vent there. And on the back of this cylinder, in the middle, it says MEB right there. And the 450X letter code is MEY, and then it doesn't have the breather. So that cylinder was for an R. That was a mess up either at Honda or the dealership. I don't know. The cylinder got swapped into the wrong cylinder, got put in the right box. So had to send that one back and get a new one. And let's go ahead and start prepping our head. We did all new intake valves, valve springs, keepers, all that stuff, valve seals. So I sent this head out to Richie Morell. He runs Morell Machining. He's up in Poway. He does all my valve seat cutting and kind of head machining work. So you can see nice 3-cut valve seats there. I'm going to take the new valves out And he also surfaces the heads for me. So this one was slightly warped. He was able to surface it. He cleans them up real nice. So putting the lower washers in, and then we will put in our valve seals. Make sure to put those bottom keepers or retainers in before you put your valve seals on. So our exhaust valve seals, I'll use a punch to kind of guide them, one that's a lot smaller than the valve guide, just to kind of guide the seals on a head like this. Not a big deal. You don't really need to do that because the valve guides stick out and they're easy to get to. You can see these intake ones. I'm just putting them on with my hands. But like newer style bikes or Yamahas, they have the guides are kind of recessed down in there. So you have to use a punch, or like Motion Pro makes a valve seal installer tool, but I just use a really small punch to kind of guide it down and then either push it on with your finger or push it on with the punch. So valve springs go in, part goes on, keepers go in, and then I'm just using this small valve spring compressor. Yes, I do have the big Motion Pro valve spring compressor that you can put in the vise and hold it up there, hold the head up there, and keepers on that way. But on a head like this, where the guides stick out and there's no risk of scratching where the shim bucket goes, like picture a Yamaha or a different kind of bike like that, I just use this little valve spring compressor and it holds the keepers in as you compress it down. I just use a clean rag on the bottom so that the valves don't move down out of the head. So I'll set the little valve keepers in the retainer there and then push them on. So intakes are done. Finish up this last exhaust one here. Push our keepers in so they're both happy down in there. And we'll install the final valve spring here. And that's it. We're ready for setting the clearance. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is before I put the head on, I'm going to set the valve clearances just on the bench, basically without the cam chain not connected. It's a little easier to do without pulling the cam in and out without dealing with the cam chain. So since these are new valves, I basically just start with a size, make them both the same on the intakes and both the same on the exhaust. I think I probably started with 175 intake shims and probably 210 exhaust shims. We'll put those shims in. We'll measure our intake clearance once we have those in and the cam in. And usually to kind of simulate the cam chain being in there, you can kind of push down with your hand on the left side of the cam where it sticks out of the holder, like where the sprocket rides and where the cam chain would be, and measure there. So sometimes that may make the intake, the left intake specifically, a little bit tighter, which is good, simulating that you have tension on the cam chain. So I'm going to run this thing down. I'm not torquing it or anything. I'm just running it down, and I'm going to measure 6 thousandths is the spec for this gen of Honda on the intake. So I always measure in standard and thousandths, and it's plus or minus one. So you're basically looking for a 5, 6, or 7 thousandths clearance on the intake. And the way I know if I need to adjust is if I'll always start with the 6, measure, and if I can get like an 8 in there, I know I need to go up one shim size. If it's too tight and I can get a 4 in there, then I know I need to go down one shim size. So I always kind of skip 1,000th increments and measure And then the exhaust is 11 thousandths. So you're basically looking for 10, 11, or 12. I always measure at 11. If I can get a 13 or the other way, a 9 in, I know I need to go down at least, up or down at least one size. So the shims come in millimeters. Like a 175 is a 1.75 millimeter. A 180 is a 1.80 millimeter. So I do it kind of weird and I measure in thousandths, and then I know every 2 thousandths is one of those shim sizes. This is a hot cams kit, so they come in 0.05 millimeter increments. There are in between sizes. You have to get them OEM. So there is like a 182 or a 187. So I do have some of those in my box here from working on different OEM bikes over the years and swapping those out with ones that they needed. But generally, you can always get them with just a hot cams kit that's in 0.05 millimeter increments. So I did swap the cylinder. You can see that's an X cylinder. You can see the crankcase breather on the back right there. The cam chain tensioner is vertically oriented now. So I got our valve clearance set on the bench, and now we're dropping the head on. Next thing we got to do is work cylinder head down. I believe 48 foot-pounds on this bike. Like I said earlier in the first video, I have a chart with all the major things for most of the common bikes I work on. It's printed, it's taped on my cabinet in the garage, so I can just refer to that real quick. But how I torque these down, I pop the cam sprocket in there first. But how I torque these down is I'll run them down with an impact gun and just get them tight, snug, and then I'll start going around with the torque wrench. And I'll usually, if it's 48, I'll start at 28 and then go to 38. And then usually for the last one, I'll only go up 5 pound increments and then finally do my last lap. So I cut out those first kind of 3 laps, if you will, around the head with the torque wrench. So this is kind of the final torque setting there. You can see the wrench, the light on the wrench going green. And that thing's all torqued down, good to go. I'm gonna drop in the bolts on the cylinder and the side of the head, run those in. And then the cam sprocket I put in close to how I know that the timing needs to be set. So I have the inspection plug pulled on the stator cover there. The motor's at top dead center. Put the cam chain in there close, drop the cam in there, and just check the timing. You have your little automatic decompression weight that you got to kind of line up on the pin on the cam. Drop our cam bolts in, run those down. And once those are nugged up, we'll snug those up with a T-handle. And then we can actually go forward with setting our timing or bolting our cam rocket on. So I'm gonna rep the bolts with red Loctite, and then you can see it's a little hard to see in the video, but there's 2 little tick marks on the sprocket, and those line up with 2 little arrows that are on the cam chain, or excuse me, the cam holder. So We want those hash marks. They're basically sit horizontal. And once those are good, and we verify that our flywheel top dead center mark is aligned in our inspection plug, we know that we're at top dead center, and that's with the cam lobes facing back. You can do this 180 out with the cam lobes facing basically kind of forward and down, but it would be pretty tough to get the cam holder in there because you'd be putting pressure on the valve springs. I'm holding the other side. It's an 8 millimeter Allen on the primary, and then I'm just pinching down our cam sprocket bolts there. Checking our timing one more time, make sure that we're good. Looking in the hole there, making sure that hash mark's lined up and our two tick marks are lined up on our cam sprocket. And then I have the cam chain tensioner not set, so I just pulled out that little plug, and that pulls tension onto the cam chain. And then I'm going to recheck our valve clearance, specifically that I'm going to check them all, but specifically that left intake, because the cam chain tension can pull a little bit down on that side. I'll just check them all just to make sure that we're good. And we are. That's basically it. Now we got a fresh, put our valve cover on, couple bolts. Always start these front bolts. They're a weird shape, but always start those front bolts by hand. They're kind of easy to get cross-threaded because they're so long. So I always start those by hand. I've seen people break them. These older Hondas. But once they get started, then I run them down, tighten them up with a T-handle. That's good to go. You are doing this with the bike there. I didn't have the chassis of this bike in my garage, but this motor is notoriously difficult to get in and out of the bike. Some people will actually assemble the bottom end, put it in the bike, and then do the top end. Um, I just prefer to do them all the way on the bench. But putting our timing plugs back in here, put our spark plug back in. You can see I left the old exhaust gasket in there. So I'll pop that out. Retighten up our spark plug. That's good. You go there, and our other inspection plug here on the right side. Pull that exhaust gasket out. And then the new ones, they sit kind of loose. They see how they kind of fall out. So when you're putting it on the bike, I'll put a little dab of grease on it and pop it in there and then bolt the header to it. But since this is going back to the customer for him to install, I just zip tie it to the valve cover and then label the motor both sides that there's no oil in it. And he also left his sprocket, which I left off to let him tighten it on the bike with the chain. Thanks for watching.